Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Josh and I are super excited to be here. So I'd like to kick off by just welcoming everyone to this next session. And you guys are going to hear from really what I think is one of the leading voices in consumer data and e-commerce. Just sort of quick introduction about myself. So I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales, as Michael mentioned, at MightyHive. MightyHive is the data and digital media consultancy inside of S4 Capital. And so we work hand in hand with Michael and Kate and the team at MediaMonks to really bring to life a lot of the award-winning content and creative they build through data and media services. So as I mentioned, we're joined today by Josh Blacksmith. Josh is the Senior Director of Global Consumer Relationships and Engagement. Big job at Kimberly-Clark. If any of you haven't heard of Kimberly-Clark, chances are you do have their products in your house right now. So you can think of, famous brands like Kleenex, Cottonelle, and Huggies. And if you're like me and you live in California and they've just reinstituted limits on how much toilet paper and paper towels you can buy, you want to buddy up with Josh and maybe he can pull some strings for you. So, Josh, we're super excited to have you here. I will hand it over to you if you wouldn't mind maybe introducing yourself, tell the audience a little bit about Kimberly-Clark and what you do there.
Yeah, you bet. Yep. Happy to be here. Yeah, so I've been with KC Kimberly-Clark for about a year and a half or so. Was really introduced to the company because there was a strong interest to actually take ownership of the consumer relationship and start to build out a first-party database and an asset that we could stand up and utilize in a meaningful way. So my role is really a transformation role as part of the Digital Marketing Center of Excellence inside KC. So I support our three sectors, which are baby and child care, adult and feminine care, and family care, in all of our regions around the globe where we operate. So, but yeah, there's no shortage of opportunity for us to continue to take advantage of changing consumer behavior, in this space, and for sure. So.
Yeah, so maybe Josh, we can kick off. I'd love to kind of hear your point of view on how is the sort of perspective and point of view on customer data at Kimberly-Clark, at a major CPG manufacturer. How has that sort of evolved over time? It's, I think, from our perspective on sort of the partner side, we're seeing, for years, CPG brands were sort of viewed as quote unquote data poor, right? And they didn't necessarily have that relationship with the consumer. And I personally am seeing that sort of shift back. And actually, a lot of the leading CPG marketers, I think, are actually being much more innovative than some of the D2C brands. So I imagine there's been a bit of a shift in mindset there. So maybe you can speak a little bit about sort of how that point of view on customer data has evolved sort of over time at KC.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. So predates me a few years for sure. But I would say that early on as a CPG, there was a lot of focus put on building third-party audiences, leveraging third-party data. An entire department was stood up around what at the time was called DDM, data-driven marketing, but very focused on how we're leveraging data to extend our reach and drive audiences, retail, to make a purchase. I'd say the organization probably made big shifts in that space 5-6 years ago, and started to build that muscle, continued to build that muscle today as that landscape continues to evolve. A couple years ago, there was this, not a massive pivot, but a reintroduction of the importance of first-party data in starting to build out that relationship. And again, that's when I joined the organization. And when you're starting those conversations with the regions and with marketers, you're just trying to establish a goal of make sure you go out and start to collect this information and hear the principles around what you collect, why you collect, and certainly how you utilize. And what I found was when I stepped in, there was certainly a lot of chatter, a lot of conversation around the globe about all the great data that's starting to be collected. The first conversation I was having with the markets was, well, what are you doing with the data? How are we actually leveraging that in a way that's going to create incremental value for the consumer, incremental value for KC? And that's where we're continuing to evolve. There's a lot that we are continuing to do to ensure that we're recognizing first-party data as really just another data source alongside second and third-party, all of which helps build a richer consumer understanding, allows us to build better consumer experiences. So as I look ahead, thinking about sort of the deprecation of third-party cookies, that puts a lot more pressure than on our first-party asset. But it also, I think you're probably hearing this from a lot of others too, it starts to reintroduce the importance of second-party. And I think for whatever reason, up until about a year ago, most of the second-party conversations were all sort of managed in the space of sort of brokerages, and what do you have that I can use? And I think now second-party data is really playing more of a role when it comes to finding a replacement for the third-party reach that we have all become so dependent on. So understanding sort of publisher environments and understanding really all the walled gardens and what they can sort of enable through their own first-party reach. But then marrying that, of course, with our first-party, we're not taking any steps back from an emphasis on first. We truly view it as a strong marriage, a partnership between first and second as we move forward.
Yeah, so let's kind of dig into the walled garden comment a little bit.
Yeah.
You've got treasure troves of data inside of companies like Amazon and Google, and then John was just talking about Target, right, for instance.
Yeah.
And so there's probably a bit of a frenemy situation there that you have to sort of evaluate. And I'd love to kind of just hear your perspective on how can like CPG marketers and walled gardens play nice and deliver value on both sides of the value exchange, and ultimately deliver an experience and ultimately a transaction with the consumer.
Yeah. It is. It's a really interesting relationship, and I'll tell you first and foremost, we depend a lot on our customers. They're very important to us and our scale, right? I think as an organization, I don't know if you've read The Founder's Mentality, but it talks about sort of how organizations, when they first start, they're disruptive. They're able to move with agility, and over time, you scale to a point where you become what's known as an incumbent. And you lose a little bit of that insurgent muscle, that ability to sort of react in real time and move as quickly as you'd like to. And you see new disruptors enter categories, overnight, and grow scale. And I think our challenge is we don't want to lose what makes us so successful today, which is our ability to launch a product and scale it with a real efficiency, very effectively. And that's due in large part to our retail customers, the relationships that we have, and our ability to distribute product very quickly. I think time we're recognizing the opportunity that we may be leaving on the table when it comes to not having clear line of sight into the basket. And if we had that clear line of sight into the basket, we start to really recognize the broader upside potential there is from a lifetime value perspective. I think ultimately, none of us want to leave an important relationship to somebody else to handle. If it's an important relationship, you want to be as close to that end consumer as possible. And I think it's just been you're seeing this everywhere inside CPG today, right? All CPGs are sort of, waking up to the fact that we can't depend on retailers to manage our best interests. We have to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the driver's seat to some extent so that we can make sure that we're hearing from them firsthand in terms of, what are we doing to drive product innovation if we don't have our own relationship with consumers and understand where our products are or aren't hitting the mark, But B, if we don't have that direct relationship, we lose the ability to talk about our entire portfolio of products and really what can we do to sort of drive loyalty, not necessarily to a retailer, loyalty to our products over all the competitive suite of products. So, we're finding ways for sure to work effectively within all of the walled gardens. Everything's a walled garden now because everybody can charge for it when it's a walled garden. And it's important to us to make sure that we're in those environments because that's where our consumers are as well. They're not just spending time. It was interesting hearing John talk about unlocking brand purpose. Fully believe, in the importance of that for our brands to extend beyond just functional product attributes, really to get into your purpose to unlock growth. But sometimes like our brands alone, we know that's not the only way that consumers are experiencing it. They're experiencing our brands through Target.com, Walmart.com, Amazon. So it's really important to make sure that we're building a holistic consumer experience that accounts for all those places and moments where our consumers might be found, and ensuring that we're putting our best, presenting our best selves in those moments. I think the biggest challenge with it all is how do we connect it all? How do we make sure that we're not spending in 5 environments and hitting the exact same consumer? And we've got, I think everybody's sort of challenged with that to some extent, but we have, as you might imagine, strategies and ways of working that we're working through actually right now to make sure that we're making the best use of that environment as it continues to evolve. So.
Cool. And you talked a little bit about the portfolio of brands, and you guys have dozens of brands that have a unique message for the consumer, unique attributes for their customer base. And so what can you standardize from a strategy or even a tactical perspective across that entire portfolio versus what do you need to sort of allow for some nuance and flexibility from brand to brand? How do you guys think about trying to create some uniformity, but also allowing them to sort of be authentic and be themselves?
Yeah. It's I think the first place you always look to when you're trying to look to drive standardization, at least for me, the first go-to place is technology. Like, what is the back end that's supporting all these experiences we're delivering? How can we make sure we're bringing some level of standardization so that we're not reinventing how we build this experience every single time? I think in some places than others. When it comes to standing up a commerce platform, for example, it's easier for us to choose one, make sure it has all the modules that we want for a defined need, and then scale that really efficiently across other markets, sister markets. I think in other places, when it comes to like content management, for example, as you might imagine, traditional commerce, not so much the D2C, but really in the traditional commerce, we're managing hundreds, thousands of SKUs, variants, images, and sort of that ecosystem is incredibly complex. We're working with a lot of our customers' CMS, so it forces us to sort of move away from standardization to some extent. We can only standardize so much in that world. I think the other area where we have more opportunity and where we always look to is how are we standardizing consumer experience principles? And so how are we making sure that we're creating frameworks like value exchange principles, something to ensure that if we're going to be standing up a new consumer experience or we're going to be standing up a new D2C of some sort, we want to make sure that we're creating frictionless buying. We want to make sure that we're creating utility, we're creating economic incentives, we're creating community. And so I think that's, by establishing some of those standards, it just helps ensure that brands, when they toe into this, are sort of like managing it within the guardrails that we might say are sort of operating best in class. Beyond that, we want to make sure that we're being consumer centric. We have to be thinking about consumer behavior and the consumer insight first. I'll be the first person to say I don't want technology driving any of our decisions. Consumers should be driving how we make our decisions. Technology is an enabler to that, right? So I think being really sort of honed in, focused on what is it the consumer expects out of us in that moment, and then beginning to lean into, as I was saying, our individual brand's purpose, and using that to unlock some of those more emotional moments where we can build a real experience that consumers want to engage with us. I think in commerce in particular, it's really challenging to ever imagine a world where a consumer goes to 300 different websites to buy 300 different products that they make. That's why Amazon is in Walmart.com. That's why these marketplaces are evolving the way they are. I think within our brand experiences, we have to enable frictionless buying, because if a consumer comes to Huggies.com, I want them to buy in that moment. I don't want to make them go somewhere else to buy. I'd rather they buy us versus go somewhere else and shop us against all our competitors. So enabling frictionless buying is table stakes, greens fees. I think the second that you think about how do you drive step change, in terms of incrementality growth for a CPG, that's where you start to look at, what is a sort of marketplace model, if you will, or a value proposition in the space that creates enough of a pull, enough of a hook that gets consumers to actually go to you versus any of the, more traditional sort of marketplaces that already exist, already have all their credit card information saved, already have their own loyalty programs. It's a really competitive space. And the value for us at the end of the day is, again, like basket value, basket transparency. And so how are we making sure that we're giving consumers enough in that moment to feel like this is a valued experience for them so that we can get the value that we want out of that engagement too? So
Yeah, that's I like that last point. I'd love to maybe elaborate on that. Obviously, you guys are you're trying to build direct to consumer channels, but obviously a lot of the transactions are happening outside of your four walls, right? And so,
yeah.
how do you think about building relationships with consumers to, I guess, number one, to support those D2C channels, but also if you think about sort of what we kicked off here, is how do you do that in a way that allows you to actually capture more data?
Yeah.
And I imagine that's brand to brand, but is there a general sort of philosophy on how you build that relationship and actually, create a value exchange where you get some interesting data?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? I think for CPGs that do depend on retail quite a bit, I think when you don't have a direct transactional relationship, whether that's D2C or even, frankly, even coupons, if you don't have coupons that you can see redemptions at the one-to-one level, or sampling, or a loyalty program. So there are a bunch of different sort of areas that fall into that, what I would say that transactional space that allow you to get richer understanding of one-to-one behavior and give you the ability to pull different levers to try to drive that basket growth. But outside of that, the bulk of our business, to your point, is done outside of those sorts of environments, and so that's where it becomes important for us to find ways to, again, lean into purpose. A lot of focus we have is around design thinking. How do we make sure that we understand what consumers are thinking, feeling, and doing at every stage in their journey with us in our brands, so that we can look for white space opportunities or pain points in their current experience, go deep into those moments. If it's a competitive advantage for us and we have the ability through our either through our products or our purpose to deliver a better experience, it's a great place for us to lean in and invest, right? Because it's going to give us the opportunity to pull a lot of those eyeballs our way. It's going to give us a chance to deepen that relationship. So we're taking a hard look at some of the current value propositions that we have in market. In Korea, for example, we have an amazing D2C experience. Has over 80% of moms are already a part of this platform called MomQ. It's a very unique market in that so much of the business in that market is already done through mobile. It's a very digital commerce driven market. But the fact that we have a platform that has that kind of, mom representation has driven so much engagement, so much retail sales through that digital channel, some of it D2C. We have retail partners as a part of that exact same experience. But it's driven so much that we're able to sell listing fees in that market to other, brands that are looking to get to this mom audience that we've, so that's at the one end. That's like that's what our ambition is for a lot of our brands around the world. We'd love to sort of continue to evolve in that way. I think on the other end of it, we look at how do we take programs like our Huggies Rewards program that in the past was maybe a bit hard for consumers to find, if we're not spending enough A&P behind it to get the message out there. If consumers don't already have awareness of this program, how do we take that and evolve that in a way that gets it in front of more of our target? And so it was in the news recently, but we just relaunched Huggies Rewards in partnership with Fetch Rewards as a strong partner for us in that, already within a few months, surpassing sort of our numbers in terms of numbers of consumers that are not only opted into the new program we've built, but also engaging in a regular way through this program. So, it's continuous test and learn. It's bringing agility and a product mindset to the experiences we do have, and never being satisfied with sort of where we're at today, but always looking at how can we continue to grow and build on this experience. It seems to be getting some traction with consumers, and the last point I'll make on that, I think you heard me say like the value exchange principles. again, like going through that sort of design thinking, understanding where the pain points are, what are consumers after. It's on us to make sure that we're finding ways that create enough value for consumers to want to just hand over their data. I think consumers are more and more skeptical, and we're seeing that through the legislation. But we're taking active steps, not only to just meet the bar of legislation, but to truly provide transparency to consumers around what we're collecting and how we're utilizing it. Because our hope is that we're never going to be a brand that's sort of attached to poor use of data, we want to be that brand that's sort of seen as a gold standard for how to responsibly use data. We want to be a good steward of the trust consumers are placing in us. And we understand the reputational impact this sort of first-party data space plays. So a lot of focus inside the organization on making sure we're taking the right steps there for sure.
That's cool. You guys have you've been undergoing quite a bit of transformation and really sort of breaking some of the old models. So maybe kind of zooming out, a broader question: how do you guys approach digital transformation? Are there frameworks you use that you've found to be effective? And then maybe a second part of that question would be around how do you take sort of a traditional company and bring folks along for the ride and get them bought into sort of the new way of thinking?
Yeah, we've built really a proprietary approach to to how we want to actually start to drive transformation inside the organization. It was interesting because I'm going to say about a year ago, roughly, Allison Lewis, she's the Chief Growth Officer. She joined KC. And it was really great because I'll tell you, within a matter of a couple months, when she did her world tour, she came back and recognized the fact that we had a lot of great activity inside the organization globally, a lot of great forward-leaning, activity. But what she realized was that we didn't have really a program around it, a way to sort of make sure that we were driving on the right things, that we're going to drive the best value for the organization in the most efficient way, as quickly as we wanted to. And so what we did is really in February earlier this year, we kicked off a new process internally where now got ways to sort of drive agile products through the organization, where we're sort of choosing, a prototype. We're building solutions against that prototype to make sure that we're sort of incubating it, allowing that group to sort of focus, solve the problem. And then we have a clear way stood up to ensure that these things can easily scale around the globe after that. At the end of the day, it comes down to having the right executive level leadership, sponsorship. For us, it's been a huge breakthrough. Just having Mike Hsu at the helm, recognizing the fact that this is a key need for us as an organization, and investing behind it, not just in digital, but across all of our areas of commercial transformation, really, to ensure that we're building the right energy behind the right big bets, and establishing clear ways of working that are going to allow us to drive the right kinds of outcome.
So you kicked off, interesting timing, right? You kicked off that sort of new process in February, and then the pandemic hit. Yeah. I'd love to sort of hear, like, did that
literally weeks after? Yeah.
Yeah. Did that what was good that came out of that, or what did you have to sort of pivot and change the way you thought about it, or did it actually just help you accelerate sort of this new approach?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It really helped accelerate. I'd say that the things that we've been doing since COVID hit were absolutely on the radar, on the roadmap. But certain elements of that, as you might expect, were absolutely where they might have been a year out, they became top priority. And so it was, I would say, for an organization, and all CPGs are sort of in this space where you're trying to manage the today with an eye on tomorrow. And how do you not lose the quarter, but make sure you're placing the right strategic bets so that, 10 years from now, you're not losing every quarter. The interesting dynamics of what the pandemic has sort of forced on a lot of organizations, even outside of CPG, is to take things in terms of the digital revolution, as digital continues to become, we've seen that, step change in how consumers are buying. And we know that in 2021, the light's at the end of the tunnel, thank goodness, right? Sometime in 2021, we're going to see a return to some sort of new norm. That new norm is more than likely going to include some sort of uptick in physical. but I do think that the world of digital is forever changed, and I think that the transformation journey that we've been on has truly benefited by being in such a digital sort of centric world for the last 10 months and through the next 5 or 6 months. It's just helped all of us sort of establish the importance of this as a way of working, and driven the kinds of investment and prioritized focus that we've all needed. That's been really great.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to find a bit of a silver lining in it.
There's a silver lining, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So how is it? How has COVID-19 sort of changed the way you guys think about engaging with consumers? And then, as we return to some sort of quote unquote normal, what do you think sort of remains from the pandemic that sort of is going to just remain and be sort of the status quo that you guys will need to consider in how you communicate?
Yeah. I think again, I think the main thing that has changed in terms of how we communicate with consumers is it's just placed even more importance on our ability to sort of manage the digital path to purchase. I think enabling frictionless buying experiences and ensuring that we're building the right infrastructure from a data perspective to really truly manage orchestration, and make sure that we're being helpful to consumers in those key moments. Things that, again, on the roadmap, but it just put a real focus on sort of the importance of tackling those sorts of things now, because we could see the more immediate impact it was going to have on the bottom line, if we didn't sort of start to accommodate those needs. And so what I would say is we're on a good trajectory now. I would say I love the path that we're on. The transformation we've already gone through in a year and a half is sort of mind-numbing. It's hard to even articulate, sort of how much has really shifted in just 18 months here. But I couldn't be more excited about the foundation that's been laid, the roadmap that we have, and the opportunities that we're pressing into next year. It's pretty great. So.
Yeah. So you talk about frictionless buying and creating the opportunity for consumers to engage more with you guys. And maybe if we could kind of drill down on technology a little bit. Kate and John were talking about some of the new formats out there, and AR and VR, and we hear about voice and experiential. How are you guys sort of evaluating this holistically? Like, how do you think about new technology? How do you sort of vet where that fits in your mix? And what do you think are the next big opportunities for CPG brands that are trying to innovate?
Yeah. First of all, I think there are sort of two schools of thought when it comes to establishing the technology infrastructure that is needed. I think for me, anyhow, one has always been, this idea of build it and they will come. The other is, no, let's build it on demand. And I think I'm lucky enough to work with a team of professionals inside KC that sort of had the foresight, to sort of go the path of build it and they will come. Understanding there was going to be a need for this kind of infrastructure, and getting out ahead of it before the marketers, before our markets are even necessarily pulling it through. And so I think as I look ahead, a lot of what we have foundationally is a stack that we're continuing to sort of drive our own capabilities internally in terms of how do we utilize the pieces that we already have to their fullest extent. Because I would say the challenge is not necessarily, 9 times out of 10, if you hear that there's like a challenge with a specific piece of technology, it may not be the technology that's actually, struggling. It's more so sort of how do we actually make use of that the right way? So we're going through the sort of maturity curve of now that we have this technology stack in place, how are we going to unlock it as best we can to drive the full potential, the full value out of that. But as we look ahead, we're always looking for innovative ways to stand up alphas or betas with different technology partners in key markets where it makes sense, because again, it has to be all for sort of unlocking a consumer benefit and driven by an insight that we have in that market or for that sector. But I'd say the areas that I'm most focused on right now as an organization would be, you've heard me say frictionless buying, anything that can ease that buying experience. And even more so if it eases the buying experience and gives us first-party data in the process. And so we've got different pilots that we're running with some vendors, some partners that do have real-time APIs with a lot of our existing customers on both product and pricing. So consumers can buy products through our experience where we get the basket level understanding, but still fulfill through our customers. And that's really interesting technology for us because, again, it gets us closest to that consumer transaction, helps us understand lifetime value, what are they buying or not buying, and where's the upside opportunity there. Another technology I'd say we're really focused on, anything in the real-time interaction management or RTIM space. And this isn't necessarily mutually exclusive of frictionless buying, but this is about looking for opportunities for for example, forcing a pop-up box if somebody has a certain amount of dwell time on a page or scrolled or clicked a certain number of times, to make sure that we're driving a sampling opportunity in that moment, right? And the last I would say is, I'm really looking at orchestration. How do we best connect the worlds of the known and the unknown? We have a really great handle on identity resolution, identity management. We have a great handle on first-party data and management. Now, how do we make sure that we're managing for sufficiency across both of these worlds so that we're not overspending, against the same consumer? If we have, for example, an email address for a consumer, we can suppress them perhaps in some of our paid media spend if they're an engager on email. So let's think about this ecosystem together so we can extend our reach and extend our budgets in a way that makes the most sense. I'd love to say that like voice AR, like those are definitely we have those sort of on the fringe as opportunities and absolutely looking for pilot opportunities. I think sometimes it's challenging because the scale is just not there. Voice is everywhere. The challenge is it's really tough to find skills or actions right now. The discoverability of the space is challenging to a certain extent, specifically when it comes to Amazon with some of the skills. And also data security is a bit of a concern in the voice space still, with some of the things that were happening a year or so ago. So we've always got our eyes on these, and we're sort of watching them and having conversations with the teams in those spaces to make sure that at some point, if it hits the right inflection point, it's a space that we would jump into to make sure that we're getting our fair share within that environment.
That's very cool. Yeah, we got a bunch of interesting questions from the audience. One of which you sort of addressed, but I might ask you to expand on a bit. Was can you highlight some of your most successful partnerships while at Kimberly-Clark? You just spoke about a few areas that you guys have seen success, but the second part of the question I thought was interesting was are any of those partnerships that surprised you, like you didn't expect them to deliver the results or perform in a way that they did? Anything that just sort of, whether that was COVID related or otherwise, anything that surprised you out of those partnerships?
Yeah, it's I'll tell you, I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced this in some fashion or another. The number of technology providers and partners out there is, we've seen this on chiefmartech.com, right? Scott Brinker's ever evolving MarTech landscape. Over 8,000, I think there's even more than that because it was, sort of crowdsourced in this last year. But one of my biggest fears is that I'm missing out on something, that I should really know about, because it could drive ridiculous incremental growth for us if we actually had it on my radar, and so it's really challenging. I think I've gotten to a point where I try to just dream up the right consumer experience, because my going in assumption now is that there's a partner out there that can solve for that. If I can dream it up, somebody else has already dreamed it up. Now I just need to go find the right tool to help me do it best, But I'd say, if I were to throw a couple of partners out there, we've Salesforce is a big partner of ours. I think everybody has a cloud partner of some sort, but we continue to be impressed with some of the ways that they're connecting an ecosystem. But we've got a number of partnerships outside of that, different technologies that we've leveraged when it comes to whether it's ad serving or sort of creative iteration, different technologies that we're deploying to try to drive breakthrough ways of working in more of a pilot environment. I can't even tell you how many different pilots we have rolling at any given time. We get the results of those pilots and look for key ways to start to scale those around the globe. So it's an exciting space, but like I was saying, kind of an overwhelming space as well. That you know, that we're all, I think, trying to crack to some extent.
Yeah, how much of when you guys identify a new opportunity, whether it's a piece of technology or some sort of solution out there, how much of that is coming from you or your team internally, just having your finger on the pulse and knowing what's available out there, versus how much do you rely on agencies or consultancies to sort of help you track down the solutions that sort of match that desired customer experience that you described?
Yeah, I'd say it's I'll tell you, before coming to Kimberly-Clark, I spent roughly 2 decades working inside various agencies. So very familiar with sort of the agency landscape. One of the big reasons why I came to KC is because I was interested in coming into a brand that understood the value that agencies could contribute 100%, but also was able to sort of lean into its own internal teams and understanding to drive key business decisions, not become overly dependent. And I think what we found at KC is a really great balance to that point. I think we will take calls on a regular basis if we're running our own RFIs, right, on a regular basis, or RFPs for certain core technology needs that we've identified, and then, as you guys know, like that means if we're exploring a new space, there's a new one that's coming up for us right now. That means we've got meetings with 10 different vendors, 10 different potential partners that are showing up on our calendars to make sure that we are building our own understanding of what the total landscape looks like, and then honing in on what is the specific need that we think we need to go solve for. At the same time, we depend for sure and hope for and expect to have agency partners that understand the space or experts in the space as well, so that we can bring that perspective to the table, so that we're making decisions that are not only going to be best for our needs, but also will work best with what our agency partners are needing as well. So there's a lot of mutual respect there to ensure that we're building a solution together with full transparency, just to ensure that we're all sort of co-creating the solution, if you will.
Yep. Another question that sort of shifting gears was someone asked, how has your media plan changed since the pandemic, and how will they evolve long term with the current state of the economy? And it was one of the things I thought about asking was around how does the sort of like how much the consumer journey is very fragmented and is much more omni-channel approach to things. So I think sort of aligning with this question from a media mix perspective, and I know you don't necessarily touch media, but if you have a perspective on like where the company's making what channels are making more investments in, and how they're thinking about that, just given the current state of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's really interesting is that a lot of CPG companies, because they haven't been as focused on the consumer, they've been spending the bulk of their money for years behind paid media, because you can, grab a consumer's attention, and the thought has always been drive them to retail to make the purchase. So I think for organizations that are now taking a decisive shift to wanting to make sure that we understand the consumer as well and building that consumer relationship, there's a massive amount of change management internally that requires to make sure that we're now actually briefing agencies across the entire digital ecosystem, the entire comms ecosystem, not even just digital. How are we thinking about our websites? How are we thinking about email, community management? Because historically, when you're very focused on paid media only, it becomes very easy to sort of fall back on an MMM or an MTA in the US, right? It becomes very easy to fall back on those models and the ROIs you get out of those models to make all of your decisions look very, I've got a great ROI here, I'm just going to keep putting more money into that, when you can't measure community management the same way, when you can't measure a piece of content that you're building to drive organic search on your website the same way, when you can't measure email the same way, it becomes like, if I had $1 to place in paid media or over here, where I don't have, it's like, I'm going to put it into paid media. So we've gone through a lot this year in terms of making sure that we are finding ways to measure the impact of other channels and the synergistic effects that exist across the entire landscape, so that we're understanding the role that paid and earned and owned and shared all have together. And that, I would say, is one of the most significant impacts on our organization heading into 2021 and 2022, is bringing a more holistic approach to our planning that is truly consumer centric. None of us experience a brand through paid advertising only, right? So we need to put ourselves in consumers' shoes and understand what that total ecosystem looks like, and what are the experiences that consumers expect from any brand today. We got to make sure that we're sort of living up to those expectations.
Yep. I think one final question might be an interesting one to close on. Someone asked if you had any bold predictions for the future of your industry, and maybe thinking about 2021, or even beyond. Anything big you think might happen?
Well, yeah. I mean, our innovation pipeline, I would say, has never been. We've never had more focus on it. I think there are a lot of interesting. For us, we live in the space that can very easily be, commoditized. And so we're always looking for ways to make sure that we don't fall into the sort of, as easily fall into the sort of space of like low consideration and sort of, so we're absolutely looking at our innovation pipeline, looking for ways to make sure that we can stand out from the crowd and create products and solutions, digital solutions that will create some breakthrough in the market. And I think all CPGs are sort of in a very similar spot there, where we're all sort of fighting for that sort of attention and looking for ways to sort of break through.
Hey guys, you know what
Hi.
that means. I really enjoyed this chat, guys. I think you did an excellent job, and it's interesting because with frictionless commerce, everybody's kind of going towards that. But it always amazes me with brands, especially like a lot of the brands in your portfolio, how much friction people will go through in order to grab it. And I'm just thinking about Huggies. It could be 3 a.m.